Mount Hermon, an extended 50-mile ridgeline that rises to over 9,200 feet, is visible along the skyline. This is the northern entry point to the land God promised to Abraham and his descendants, now called Israel. Abraham undoubtedly had to pass by this location as he traveled to Canaan from Ur and Haran. The mountain's copious moisture provides water for springs that are sources of the Jordan River, as well as watering the lush valleys. This Crusader fortress, called Nimrod, is located on one of the lower points of the Mount Hermon range and holds a commanding view of the upper Jordan Valley. Across the Jordan Valley, and on the horizon in the distance to the west, can be seen the hills of the upper Galilee and the mountains of Lebanon. The region of Banias, known in Jesus' time as Caesarea Philippi, is to the right, in the valley about 3.5 miles away. The name of this fortress, Nimrod, after the biblical character, does not appear in written documents until the 19th century. The Crusaders built this massive fortification here in light of the site's geography, as it guards the major northern entry points into the Holy Land. The clip ends with a spectacular view of the upper Jordan Valley. The helicopter circles over the excavations and ruins of a large city in Jesus' day named Caesarea Philippi. The cave was the place of worship for the Greek idol Pan. It is in the northern Galilee, at the foot of Mount Hermon. The area, yet to be fully excavated, is rich with ruins from the 1st century and onward. Jesus brought his disciples to somewhere near this heathen city and asked who they thought he was. Peter answered that Jesus was the Messiah. In the parking lot are excavated ruins that have revealed a small part of the 1st century city, Caesarea Philippi, so named to differentiate it from Caesarea on the coast. The cave was believed by many Gentiles to be the entrance to Hades. A copious spring, one of the sources of the Jordan River, came from the cave. However, the water now originates outside and below the cave's opening. To the right of the cave are ruins of a limestone sanctuary to Pan. Statues to Pan adorn the niches on each side of the opening. Near here, Peter proclaimed Jesus was the Messiah. At the base of Mount Hermon is the Spring of Dan, the largest of the 3 sources of the Jordan River, providing 1/2 of all the water to the upper Jordan. The book of Judges records that the tribe of Dan left their allotment on the coastal plain to capture this northern site, then called Laish. They renamed the site Dan. This region has the most dependable water supply in Israel. The climate is pleasant and the soil fertile. It would seem an ideal place for settlement, except that it was located in the heart of Baal worship and at the strategic northern entry point into the country. As a result, this town's history is marked by spiritual corruption in the form of idolatry and physical destruction. Dan has much evidence of early settlement. The white arched roof preserves a complete mud brick gate dating to the Middle Bronze period, the time of Abraham. The helicopter next flies over the nearby Israelite city from the time of Solomon and later. Clearly visible is the partially restored city wall and a 6-chambered gate complex of 3 chambers on each side. A road leads to a platform in the trees where there is an altar, mentioned in the Bible, built by Rehoboam I. Dan's strategic and fertile setting are evident. The camera now looks southward through the Jordan Valley in the direction of the Sea of Galilee. On the hilltop are some of the ruins identified as the biblical city of Dan. In the distance is Mount Hermon. It was near here that Abraham defeated the 4 Mesopotamian kings. The city was named Laish until the days of the Judges. The cleared areas in the foreground are the excavated ruins of a worship site, identified as a platform and altar constructed by Jeroboam, the first ruler of the northern kingdom of Israel. Dan was considered the northern border of the Israelite nation. This is the Golan Heights in the spring. The Golan is a high plateau dotted with extinct volcanic cones. From the heights of the volcanic cones, both Damascus in Syria and the Sea of Galilee in Israel can be seen, although not in this clip. The strategic setting of this plain has made it a significant battleground in both ancient and modern times. The large concentric rock rings now coming into view are from the prehistoric period. Their purpose is unknown, although the circle's external openings face the rising sun of the summer solstice. In biblical times, this region was known as Bashan, and in the Roman period, Gaulonitis. The Golan has long been a pasture land for cattle, and grazing is used numerous times in the Bible as a picture of peace. Perhaps the most familiar passage concerning cattle is Amos chapter 4, verse 1, in which the prophet likens the wealthy women of Samaria to the fat cows of lush Bashan. In the time of Jesus, Lower Golan, part of which is seen here, was named Gaulonitis and highly Hellenized. Most Jews were not observant of the law of Moses. An exception was those who lived here, at Gamla. Shaped like a camel's hump, the city was built on this ridge, just above the plain of Bethsaida. The Jewish historian Josephus records that the city was instrumental in the revolt against Rome in AD 66 to 70. Gamla is sometimes referred to as the Masada of the North, since it held out against Rome very much as the more famous Masada did at the very end of the revolt. Rather than be captured as the Romans made the final assault on the city in AD 67, Josephus reported that thousands of Jewish men, women, and children leaped to their death from the peak of this ridge. The steeply ascending road climbs 1,100 feet from the Sea of Galilee to the hill on which sat the Decapolis city of Hippos. The Decapolis was the name given to 10 Greco-Roman cities, most of which were east of the Sea of Galilee. On this prominent hilltop, Hippos was visible from Capernaum and other nearby towns. Jesus may well have had this place in mind when he said, "A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden." Many of the buildings and ruins seen here were erected well after the 1st century. However, throughout its history, the original Roman town plan was preserved. Public buildings stood at intersections of streets that ran at right angles. The main street is distinguishable and ran about where the road is seen. Along this are remnants of red granite columns, attesting to the beauty of the original city. At the end of the clip, the eastern hillsides come into view, where numerous cemeteries have been found. The helicopter flies over a section of the northern Jordan Valley, known as the Hula, which is midway between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon. The Jordan flows through the valley. Until 1958, this area was surrounded by swamps and had a medium-sized lake, the Hula. The lake was drained to rid modern Israel of malaria and to increase farming. Since rainfall here is between 16 to 25 inches a year, the valley is fertile and agriculturally rich. In ancient times, an important international highway from Damascus passed just south of this valley. This is the Upper Galilee, so called because it is higher in elevation than the southern hills of the Lower Galilee. The Upper Galilee did not have a major role in the ancient Near East because of its very rugged topography. The ruins on the top of the hill are of the 3rd to 5th century AD town of Barum, and until 1948 an Arab village. After passing over the more recent ruins, the remains of a 3rd century AD synagogue, the one with walls and pillars, come into view. The synagogue is one of the best preserved in the Upper Galilee. These are some of the excavated ruins of Hatzor, located on the western edge of the Hula Valley, that can be seen in the distance. The helicopter moves north along the west side of the more than 200 acres that make up this huge mound, one of the largest in Israel. As can be seen, only a small portion has been archaeologically explored. The city's importance and size throughout history is explainable, as it was at the strategic junction of routes that connected nations of the ancient Near East. There is evidence of continuous settlement here for over 2,000 years, until, it is assumed, the Assyrians destroyed it. The Bible reports that earlier, both Joshua and Deborah confronted the armies of this city. The helicopter is over the southern edge of the Sea of Galilee and slowly turns to provide us with a 360-degree view of the area. The eastern shore of the sea comes into view, with the cliffs of the Golan Heights, or Bashan, on the right. The sea is about 12 miles long, 8 miles wide, and at 700 feet below sea level, it is the world's lowest body of fresh water. In the haze in the distance is the northern shore, where Jesus performed most of his ministry when in the region. The hazy conditions are typical for Israel during much of the year. The camera continues to turn and view the southwest corner of the lake, with the hills of Lower Galilee in the background. Turning south, the hills of Samaria in the distance are seen, and then the green fields of the Jordan Valley, south of the sea, come into view. If it were clear, we would see Jericho and the Dead Sea in the far distance. The hills left, east of the Jordan Valley, is a region called Gilead. The clip ends at its starting point, looking east at the Yarmouk Valley and River in the modern country of Jordan. The camera flies low over the Jordan River, south of the Hula Valley, and north of the Sea of Galilee. In the Bible, the green vegetation seen along the riverbed is called the Zor, sometimes translated thicket or jungle. It ranges from a few yards to almost a mile wide and was the habitat of wild animals, such as lions, mentioned in the Bible. Coming into view are two one-way iron bridges known as the Bridge of Jacob's Daughters, although it is not known how this name came about. This crossing has been used throughout history. The city of Hatzor guards this crossing and is just a few miles to the west. Here the river falls some 900 feet in 10 miles, and that accounts for the river's noticeable current. Some scholars believe that swiftness of the waters may be reflected in the name, Jordan, from a verb meaning to descend. With the Sea of Galilee in the background, the camera views the Jordan River's entrance into the lake at its northeast corner. In Jesus' day, west of the river on the right was the region of Bethsaida of Galilee. On the left was Gaulanitis. The camera turns to show the northwest shoreline. Barely seen along the coast, in one of the light brown areas, are the remains of Capernaum, and in the distance, the hills of Upper Galilee. It was along this shoreline, a prosperous fishing region, that Jesus established his Galilean ministry. It is very swampy where the river enters the lake. As a consequence, international traffic crossed the river further north, near Hatzor, and then came south in the vicinity of Capernaum. With the Sea of Galilee in the upper right of the screen, 1.5 miles away, the camera flies over a ruin, or tell of a 1st century A.D. fishing village. Since this place is east of the Jordan River, in the region of Gaulanitis, some scholars believe these to be the ruins of Bethsaida Julius. Another Bethsaida, a few miles west of here in the region of Galilee, was probably the Bethsaida of the New Testament, not yet found, where Jesus preached and taught. The camera views the northwestern corner of the Sea of Galilee, the region known as Bethsaida in the New Testament. Here would have been the village of Bethsaida that Jesus visited, as well as the villages of Chorazin and Capernaum. In the upper left corner of the screen, the Jordan River enters the sea. High on a hill near the Sea of Galilee are the ruins of Chorazin. A prominent structure in Chorazin was the synagogue, the building with pillars on the left. Next to it, in the large square complex, are the foundations of a multi-roomed estate built around inner courtyards. An extended family lived here. The rooms had flat roofs covered with mud, as in the story of the healing of the paralytic. The other rectangular buildings are storage facilities. Chorazin, nearby Bethsaida and Capernaum, were criticized by Jesus for not repenting in spite of all the miracles that were performed there. Jesus had an extended ministry along the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, the area seen in this clip. Tradition places one of his best-known teachings, the Sermon on the Mount, at this lovely site that is marked by the small Catholic church with the gray dome. Built in 1938, the octagonal shape of the church commemorates the 8 Beatitudes. Jesus explained the true meaning and purpose of the law that God had given Moses. It was not to create self-righteous individuals who were proud of their obedience to the law, but to stimulate a sense of need of God and the desire to identify with Him through obedience. Jesus' message was well received among his observant Jewish followers in the Galilee region. From the porches of the church, one can see almost all the places Jesus lived, taught, and preached around the lake. Although this site is devoid of archaeological interest, it is a peaceful place to visit and from which to reflect on Jesus' message. The modern tall rectangular building near the shore marks the western edge of Capernaum, the center of Jesus' Galilean ministry. Matthew calls Capernaum Jesus' own city, and Mark says Jesus was at home in Capernaum. As the helicopter passes over the archaeological excavations, a round-roofed structure is seen. This protects a Roman Catholic church and remnants of the traditional site of Peter's house. The orange roof is a Greek Orthodox church built near ruins that have been dated from the 7th to 11th centuries A.D. As the helicopter passes near the church and turns to the north, the hills of Lower Galilee can be seen in the distance. This view begins by looking south over the Sea of Galilee, and the excavated buildings of Capernaum can be seen. This town was the home of Peter. It was a center for Jesus' Galilean ministry and is called his own city in the New Testament. The excavations are the ruins of biblical Capernaum. The most prominent structure in Capernaum and other Jewish towns was the synagogue. The white structure is the remains of Capernaum's synagogue. Although the present building is later than the time of Jesus, evidence suggests that this stands on the foundations of the synagogue of Jesus' day. The octagonal structure is a Roman Catholic church over the traditional site of Peter's house, where Jesus lived during his ministry. Around the synagogue are walls and foundations of multi-roomed homes from the time of Jesus. The red-roofed building closest to the water is a chapel remembering where Jesus met his disciples after the resurrection. This pleasant wooded cove on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, a mile west of Capernaum, is known as Heptapagon, or the 7 Springs. Here are springs that attract fish to which James chapter 3, verse 11 may refer. The white church coming into view, with the square open courtyard, is the church of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, an event that took place in the vicinity. As the camera turns to show the sea, one can imagine Jesus walking the shoreline and watching the bustling fishing activities. Along here Jesus preached, and among the fishermen found his first followers and disciples. A brief view of the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, and on the hill, the excavations of biblical Gennesaret. The city dominated the international highway that ran from the Mediterranean coast to Damascus. On the left of the screen, the large hill with caves embedded in its sheer cliffs, is Mount Arbel. Zealots, a religious group who sought the overthrow of Rome, hid in these caves in the early days of King Herod the Great. In about 40 B.C., one such group was driven out of the caves by Herod's army. The lush green flat area coming into view on the west side of the Sea of Galilee is the Magdala Plain. Far in the distance can be seen Mount Merom and other peaks of Upper Galilee. The city of Magdala was in this plain, and it appears to have been a city of wealth. Close to the international coastal highway, it was famous for numerous industries, including fishing and dye facilities. As the camera turns out over the Sea of Galilee, the northern shore, with Capernaum in the far distance, can be seen. The caves of Mount Arbel, mentioned in the previous clip, are seen here. They are in sheer cliffs that descend 900 to 1,200 feet to the Sea of Galilee and the international highway that traversed the valley below. These caves show signs of habitation from prehistoric times. Hosea mentions the area as a symbol of destruction in battle. In the 2 centuries prior to Jesus, the caves were used as hideouts by Jewish freedom fighters who fought the Seleucid Empire and then the Romans. According to Josephus, Herod the Great drove out the zealots who opposed his rule with the help of the Romans. The caves on this cliff symbolize the long-standing resentment of Galilean Jewry to foreign dominion in Jesus' day. The helicopter flies south along the west coast of the Sea of Galilee. In the 1st century, the shore was lined with small villages that exploited the lake's fishing riches. In the hazy distance, the white cliffs on the Golan Heights, or biblical Bashan, can be made out on the east side of the lake. The modern city of Tiberias, built along the lake and now expanding up the hill, comes into view. There is no mention in Scripture of Tiberias, although Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great, built the town and made it the Roman capital of Galilee during the years of Jesus' ministry. It was named after Antipas's patron, the Roman Emperor Tiberius. After the helicopter circles west and then north at the end of the clip, the Arbel mountain comes into view. These are the remains of the city of Sepphoris, a corruption of the Hebrew word Sippor, meaning bird. Located in the lower Galilee, 380 feet above the surrounding Netofa Valley, it provides a panoramic view of the area and a clue to its strategic importance. Around 60 BC, the Romans occupied the land, and Sepphoris was a regional capital. It was rebuilt by Herod Antipas. The city then came to represent the wealth and corruption of Greek culture in a Roman world. 4 miles south, in the distant hills, was humble Nazareth. Thus, Sepphoris was a stark contrast to the unassuming culture of the observant Jews in the nearby villages. The helicopter circles over part of the excavated areas of Sepphoris. The theater seated an estimated 4,500 persons and was cut out of the bedrock. On the summit, the square building with windows is the rebuilt remains of a Crusader fort. The modern tiered building covers the excavations of a magnificent 3rd century house with a beautiful mosaic floor. Sepphoris is not mentioned in the Bible, but it was a wealthy Greek city, not far from Nazareth in Jesus' day. Circling the hill, the excavations of the upper city are seen. These homes, built in the 1st century A.D., were closely set to each other and fronted on a paved street. In many of these homes, ritual baths have been found, indicating that they belonged to Jews. The helicopter flies over Nazareth. In Jesus' day, the extent of the whole village was under the modern church complex that is marked by the gray dome in the center of the scene. The original village and today's city sits in a geographic bowl surrounded by higher hills. The Nazareth of Jesus' day was so insignificant, with only a few hundred residents, that it is not mentioned in any extra-biblical sources. For this reason, Nathanael, whose home was in Cana, a short distance from Nazareth, asked, "Can any good thing come from Nazareth?" Gossip and rumors must have spread quickly in such a tiny town. Mary's pregnancy required Joseph to have incredible faith and is a powerful testimony to Joseph's obedience to God. As the helicopter completes its flight over the hill north of the modern city, the Netofa Valley can be seen on the other side. In Jesus' day, The entire tiny and humble town of Nazareth was located under the modern church complex, marked by the gray dome, over which the helicopter circles. The original village, like the modern city, was situated in a bowl on a ridge that bordered the Jezreel Valley, just off the top of the screen. The families of Joseph and Mary were from Bethlehem in Judea, yet they lived in Nazareth in Galilee, on this isolated ridge. Many Galilean towns were settled around 100 BC, as the independent Jewish nation, under Alexander Jannaeus, tried to restore Jewish presence in this region that had been devastated through earlier warfare. Conceivably, the families of Mary and Joseph were involved in this settlement effort. The lovely Franciscan church is built over earlier churches dating back to the Byzantine period. Although the precise place is unknown, the church commemorates the Annunciation to Mary. This edifice was completed in the late 1950s. Beneath the church is a small museum and ruins of homes built into caves that date to Jesus' time. This clip begins with a view of a barren cliff, the modern city of Nazareth in the background. The cliff overlooks the Jezreel Valley that will be seen later. The cliff is about 2 miles from Nazareth and is reputed to be the brow of the hill from which Jesus was to be thrown. Next, the Jezreel Valley comes into view. The distant hill rising in the mist in the valley is Mount Tabor, scene of Deborah and Barak's battle against the Canaanite king of Hazor. Next, the high hills in the distance are those of Moreh, where Gideon attacked the Midianites. The camera looks to the south and a road that crosses the valley. It goes to Megiddo. Turning, the western end of the valley comes into view. As the helicopter completes its circle, the brow of the hill and the Nazareth Ridge are again seen. Christian pilgrims since the 4th century have associated the transfiguration of Jesus with this high hill, Mount Tabor, in eastern Lower Galilee. However, since Scripture reports the event took place 6 days after Peter acknowledges Jesus as Messiah at Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon would seem to be the more likely candidate for the high mountain upon which the transfiguration occurred, not here at Mount Tabor. The Bible reports that the followers of Deborah and Barak attacked a chariot army that had camped in the valley. Throughout history, other battles important to Israel's past have been fought around this mountain. From the top, a commanding view can be gained of the Jezreel Valley to the west, the Herod Valley to the south, and the Jordan Valley to the east. The early Israelite city of Bethshan stood on the hilltop in the center, around which are the excavated remains of later Roman and Byzantine periods. The green hill in the far distance is Mount Gilboa. Archaeological investigation has indicated Bethshan has a long period of occupation, even before the Israelites entered the land. The Philistines controlled Bethshan when Israel's first king, Saul, died on nearby Mount Gilboa. This video shows the excavations on the 250-foot-high hill of early Bethshan, as well as those of the later city, Scythopolis, that surrounded the hill. Scythopolis was a Gentile city in Jesus' day, one of 10 that comprised a region known as the Decapolis, or 10 cities. These 10 cities epitomized Greco-Roman culture and had public bathhouses, theaters, and temples to various idols. The main street running through the city to the hill dates from the Byzantine period. It was well drained with 18-foot-wide mosaic-floored sidewalks, raised 3 feet above the pavement, to protect pedestrians from chariots and horses. The helicopter flies close to the lower slopes of Mount Gilboa on the south side of the Jezreel Valley. At the foot of the wooded hillside below us is Ein Harod, also known as Gideon's Spring. In Judges chapter 7, Gideon and the Israelites he had summoned assembled near this spring. Here, Gideon selected 300 soldiers who were to accompany him in surprising the Midianite hordes. The spring is in a cave beyond the swimming pool at the base of the hill, below the White House. The pool is fed by the spring's water. Circling east of the spring, the camera gives us a view of the vast Jezreel Valley, where the Midianite armies, soon to flee in panic, were encamped. On the left in the distance are the hills of Moreh. In the foreground are the remains of the city of Jezreel, Ahab's capital and home to his queen, Jezebel. As the camera circles, the southern end of the Jezreel Valley comes into view, and the northern slopes of Mount Gilboa can be seen on the right, over the mound. Many biblical personalities, such as Elijah, Hosea, Jehu, and Naboth, are connected to this city. On the southern edge of the Jezreel Valley lies the 18-acre mound containing the remains of the cities of Megiddo. This site is strategically positioned at the northern exit of a valley through which passed the international highway that connected Egypt with the rest of the ancient Near East. Archaeologists have determined that this location has been destroyed and rebuilt more than 20 times, attesting to its timeless military significance. This is Revelation's Armageddon, from the Hebrew Har Megiddo, or Hill of Megiddo. Israel was unable to control this site until the time of Solomon. As the camera circles the tell, it is possible to observe excavations that have revealed palaces, walls, gates, and in lower levels of the deep archaeological cut, a cultic shrine and altar. In the foreground are where Megiddo's entrance gates were located. The present path follows the ancient road to the city. Most of the exposed area we see here dates from the time of Israelite settlement. However, as the helicopter circles, a deep trench is visible. The lower level exposes settlement more than 4,000 years old. Above and to the left is a palace complex dating to Solomon. The large circular hole at the upper left is a deep grain storage silo from the time of Jeroboam II. To the silo's left are walls and foundations that some archaeologists identify as Solomonic stables. Archaeologists began to excavate here in 1925, and limited expeditions on portions of the tell continue to the present. In the upper right corner of the tell, the dark shaft of the water system comes into view. Inside, steps descended to a tunnel that led outside the city to a concealed spring. In the distance is the Jezreel Valley. The hill is Mount Carmel, and the square building on the summit is a monastery that remembers Elijah's encounter with the prophets of Baal. Throughout Israel's history, the abhorrent worship of Baal prevailed. Ahab's marriage to Jezebel, who worshipped Baal, seemed to increase the Israelites' interest in this heathen deity. In response, God raised up the prophet Elijah, who, according to the Bible, confronted 450 of Baal's prophets somewhere on this Mount Carmel ridge. In spite of that event, the ridge's image was used by Old Testament prophets as a symbol of strength, beauty, and fertility.